Late one night in the spring of 1958, so a few months after Jean's death, Frances and her 46-year-old daughter, whose name was Jane, were driving down a freeway in Northern California, coming home from a road trip they had taken as sort of a celebration of Jean's life. And so as they're driving along, both women are looking out the window, they're not really talking, and the radio wasn't on, and so the only sound was the sound of the tires on the road. It was just very quiet. But then sort of out of nowhere, Jane spoke up and told her mother about something really weird that had happened to her on the morning of Jean's death. And she couldn't stop thinking about it, and it bothered her so much, she just had to tell her mom. According to Jane, she had woken up on that morning, and standing in her room on the other side was this little man with these strange polished shoes, striped pants, black coat with coattails, and these bright blue eyes, who was looking right at her and grinning. And when Frances heard this, she couldn't believe it. And she blurted out to her daughter that she had never told anybody except for Jean, but on that morning, she had seen the exact same man in her bedroom. And so for the rest of the ride, the mother and daughter just compare notes, talking about the whole experience, exactly what they remember, exactly what he looked like, how they felt, like what they thought it meant. And then at some point, towards the end of this sort of revelation they're both having, where they're both realizing they've had this shared experience, Frances says something that catches Jane's attention. Frances says, yeah, and then, right before he vanished, he told me he was here for Jean. And then, your dad died 24 hours later. And Jane, when she heard this, she goes quiet and she looks at her mom and she's like, that's not what he said to me. And Frances is like, what do you mean? Like, what did he say to you? And Jane, she's just looking straight ahead. She's driving and she goes, he said, I'm here for Jane. He was here for me. For a moment, the car just went totally quiet, and neither woman knew what to say. But then Frances was like, well, wait a minute. I know the little man said to me, I'm here for Jean. And then 24 hours later, your dad died. Jean died. And so it sort of seemed like they were connected. And you're saying that the same thing happened to you. You've had the exact same experience as me on the same morning, the same time frame that I know he said, I'm here for Jean. And you think he said, I'm here for Jane? But you're still alive, and that was months ago. You must have just misheard him. He must have said, I'm here for Jean, same as me, and you just thought he said Jane. And so pretty quickly, both women agreed that that had to have been what happened. They had the exact same experience, and in both cases, this guy has said he's here for Jean. Has to be what happened. However, Frances would be wrong. Because on December 7th, 1958, exactly a year and 1 day after Jean died, Frances's daughter, Jane, died as well. It would turn out she had not been perfectly healthy as she and her mother believed when she saw this little man in the strange outfit with the blue eyes. She had had cancer that likely had just cropped up but had gone undetected. And now, by the time doctors were realizing she had it, it was too late. It had spread to the point where there was nothing they could do. Following her daughter's death, Frances was so overcome with grief that she poured her energy into basically just telling everyone she could about this little man that she had seen before her husband's death and her daughter had claimed to have seen before she died. It just felt like, we gotta tell people about this, like what happened? And she even ended up writing to a journalist to try to get this story out there, to try to figure out what the heck that was. However, nobody came forward with any sort of meaningful explanation about what this experience was, what it meant, how real it was. No one knew what to make of it. However, after getting the story out there and describing in agonizing detail every little thing that she remembered from this experience, Frances did learn one piece of information that does seem to begin to explain who this little man was. That man's outfit, the old-fashioned dress shoes, the striped pants, the white vest, the black coattails, is actually the uniform of a very specific profession. The little man with the blue eyes was dressed exactly like a 19th century undertaker.